What is going on in Syria? The collapse of the regime, a new Islamist leader who's been non-committal about his vision for the future, Israeli airstrikes on Syrian military assets, the crumbling of the axis of resistance. Okay, how do we get here, and what does it mean for the future of the region? For more than 50 years, Papa Assad and Jr. ruled Syria with an iron fist. In 2011, Assad Jr. brutally crushed a peaceful uprising, sparking a civil war in which more than 500,000 people were killed and 12 million were forced to flee their homes. 13 years later, in the final days of the dictatorship, an Islamist militant group and its allies launched a bold attack, and the regime's forces crumbled. Celebrations erupted in the streets, and just hours later, Russia announced that Assad had fled to Moscow. And while he's off drinking vodka and counting his stolen billions, perhaps the biggest loser in this mess is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Wait, what's Iran have to do with Syria? Rewind to 1979. While the world was dancing to disco, Iran was going through its Islamic revolution. This wasn't just about replacing the government, it was about changing the entire Middle East, a revolutionary movement that would demolish Western influence in the region and restore Islamic power to the world. While America and former Iran were once great friends, America and the Islamic Republic of Iran were now mortal enemies. So America backed Iraq in the Iran-Iraq War of the 80s. That conflict exposed the Islamic Republic's vulnerability, surrounded by potential enemies and isolated internationally. Never again would the Islamic Republic allow itself to be so exposed. So it switched its entire approach to regional politics.
What kind of changes?
It was time for the Ayatollahs to make some friends, wherever they could find them. What did they do?
We'll start with a little club.
They created an exclusive members-only club and gave it a really cool name. The Axis of Resistance.
It's not a club.
Fine. The Axis of Resistance is a network of Islamic Republic allies and proxies across the Middle East. And the very first card-carrying member? Syria. Think of it as the Islamic Republic's version of a franchise operation, except instead of selling burgers, they are selling a vision of Islamic resistance against Western influence. And after America, the representation of Western influence at the top of their list is, yeah, you guessed it, Israel. Or what they affectionately termed the Little Satan.
Oh, so cute.
That's because while Jews see Israel as the historic return of a people to its homeland, the Islamic Republic sees it as the last remaining Western colony in the Middle East. And that's not something they're comfortable with.
We cannot let them win. It's us versus them.
Not so fast. The Islamic Republic of Iran is really far from Israel, and their military is not exactly major league. They have some missiles and drones that can reach Israel, but not nearly enough to, obliterate the Jewish state. So, since the 80s, the Islamic Republic's goal has been to slowly wear down Israel by supporting groups fighting on its borders. By fighting the Zionists through these proxies and using them to traffic billions of dollars, weapons, and training, the leaders of the Islamic Republic can keep up the good fight without risking their own necks. Okay, so who are these proxies? Well, we can loosely divide them into three categories. Group number one, members of the Shia sect of Islam, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, a number of Iraqi militias, and a large segment of the Houthis in Yemen.
Who?
Who ever heard of them before all this started? Group number two, anti-Saudi partners, including the Houthis again, who directly engage in conflict with Saudi Arabia, the Syrian government under Assad, and some Iraqi political and militant groups. And group number three, the anti-Israel partners. Well, everyone's anti-Israel, aren't they? The main ones, though, are Hezbollah, Palestinian groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the Assad regime, and more Iraqi militias. All these groups formed the Islamic Republic of Iran's Axis of Resistance. And after Hamas's October 7th assault and Israel's war on Hamas, they all got in on the action, sending rockets, missiles, and drones into Israel. Well, everybody except one. Syria.
Would you stop being such a wuss?
So if Assad wasn't shooting at Israel, what good was he to the axis of resistance? Syria provided the crucial land bridge that allowed the Islamic Republic to supply Hezbollah and Lebanon with funds, arms, drugs, you name it. Without Syria, the Islamic Republic's ability to project power into Lebanon and threaten Israel would be severely compromised. In return, Assad got Hezbollah's help crushing that popular uprising against his rule. When the revolution started in 2011, the Syrian military was so weak that fighters from Iraq and Hezbollah came in to save the day. And by save the day, I mean carry out atrocities against Assad's own citizens. It seemed to be a winning strategy until the axis of resistance totally overplayed their hand. After a year of Hezbollah attacks on northern Israel and Israeli warnings to knock it off, Israel finally hit the detonate button on Hezbollah's pagers. And, well, you know the rest of the story, ending with Hezbollah abandoning their supporting front for Hamas. And with Hezbollah's fighters ranging from fingerless to lifeless, the rebels in Syria saw their chance. Another domino in the axis of resistance came tumbling down, replaced by people who think of the Islamic Republic as the guys who sponsored over a decade of atrocities against Syrian civilians. Whoops. Whatever emerges from Syria's chaos, be it a democracy, another dictatorship, or sustained instability, could well reshape the balance of power in the Middle East for years to come. And the Islamic Republic of Iran? Well, as a top US intelligence official said, the collapse of the Assad regime was a strategic blow of historic proportions for Iran. Hezbollah is up a creek without being able to resupply through Syria. The Islamic Republic will no longer be selling sanctioned oil to Syria, cutting further into their weak economy. The Syrian rebels hate the Islamic Republic and Hezbollah more than they hate Israel. And back home, too, the Islamic Republic is facing some serious challenges. Number one, their supreme leader is turning 86 next year. Number two, their government's popularity is plummeting, particularly among younger Iranians tired of international isolation and economic hardship. And of course, number three, their decades-old, carefully constructed network of regional influence is falling apart. Not to mention the loss of their entire air defense network in Israeli strikes last year, leaving them more vulnerable than ever to attack. Okay, I mentioned it. So what do? How does the Islamic Republic continue to keep its enemies at bay and project power in the region? Well, let's face it, nothing says, "Hi, we're still relevant," quite like nuclear weapons. Which is why Trump and Israel are back talking about taking out Iran's nuclear capabilities. Trump has said he'll restore an aggressive maximum pressure strategy to deter the Islamic Republic from building a nuclear weapon. And that seems to be the most peaceful option under discussion. But I wouldn't write off the Iranians just yet. The Islamic Republic has built loyalty across the region, partly with cash and weapons, but also by drawing on pretty widespread opposition to American and Israeli dominance. And that's not going anywhere. As a professor at Tehran University pointed out, the Islamic Republic remains the only state to openly confront Israel and support the Palestinian cause in any serious way. And the Islamic Republic has historically found a foothold in fractured states, and might be able to maintain its influence in Syria regardless of the country's political future. And going back to that professor, he said, if you're going to have chaos and Syria turns into another Libya, that's something Iran can manage. So, unfortunately, the Islamic Republic's best move in Syria now might be to support destabilizing groups, keeping the country in chaos so that resources can continue to flow through the country to Hezbollah.
Oh, good.
Right, so what does all of this mean for the Middle East's other wild child, Israel? Well, it's a classic good news, bad news situation. The good news? The Islamic Republic's network of threats is weaker than ever. The bad news? The devil you know might be replaced by the devils you don't. One Syrian rebel told Israel's Khan News, "My message to Israel is, don't worry about Iran and Hezbollah, we're taking care of them." Sure, you do that, go ahead. We'll just go chill by the pool.
I don't think so.
Just because the Syrian rebels are mostly opposed to the Islamic Republic doesn't mean that they'll be friendly with Israel. Many of the groups in the Syrian opposition are radical Islamist groups, some linked to Al-Qaeda, and many to Turkey, which is extremely anti-Zionist, though also anti-Iran. So despite all of my affection for Syrian rebel leaders, I personally am glad Israel didn't turn its swords into plowshares just yet. Instead, Israel bombed the crap out of just about everything in Syria that might be used against it. Military equipment, rocket manufacturing facilities, chemical weapons development sites. You know, not the kind of toys they wanted their new Islamist neighbors to get for Christmas. So what's next for Israel? With the war in Gaza quieting down, Hezbollah neutralized for now, the Islamic Republic exposed to aerial assault, and the Houthis continuing to fire missiles and drones at Israel, it seems like the Israeli leadership have a few options. They can try to teach the Houthis the same lesson they taught Hezbollah, they can go for the head of the snake and try to deliver a knockout punch to the Islamic Republic, or they can do what the rest of us will be doing. Wait and see what happens and respond accordingly. So what do you think Israel will do next? And do you think neighbor Syria will become Chandler and Joey or Mr. Heckles? Let us know in the comments.
Someone comment on the pants!